Discipline in a long-distance race. Do you see what this means? All these pioneers who blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on. It means we better get on with it. Strip down, start running, and never quit. No extra spiritual fat, no parasitic sins. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed, that exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever, and now he's there in the place of honour right alongside God. When do you find yourselves flagging in your faith? Go over that story again, item by item, that long litany of hostility he ploughed through. That will shoot adrenaline into your souls.
One of the things I've really enjoyed and found helpful over the last few weeks has been praying with friends from Kingfisher, using WhatsApp or FaceTime. I'm so thankful for technology at this time, which means that whilst we can't be in the same room, we can at least see each other and have a conversation. A few weeks ago, when the lockdown had just got underway, I was praying with a friend. And as we prayed, some words that were familiar, but I couldn't quite place, came really powerfully into my mind. It wasn't just a passing thought, but one of those experiences when you can't get rid of the thought. It just keeps coming back stronger each time. The words were, through it all, my eyes are on you. When that happens to me, and it's not often my experience, I've learned to say to God, is that you? Please, God, show me whether this is your voice or my overactive imagination. And if it is you, help me hear what it is you want me to know. So I shared the thought that had come into my mind with my friend, and she excitedly confirmed that God had given her a particular worship song that week that had exactly that line. You may know it. It's a song from Bethel Music called It Is Well. And the chorus goes like this. Through it all, my eyes are on you. Through it all, it is well. Through it all, my eyes are on you. It is well with me. My friend had shared the song on our Kingfisher WhatsApp group for prayer and praise earlier that week, but I hadn't seen it. I'm afraid I'm not the quickest with electronic communications. However, after our prayer time, I did listen to the song, and it resonated so strongly with what I felt God has been saying to me actually over several months now. I feel God's been saying, Alison, eyes on me. So I've been looking at what Scripture has to say about keeping our eyes on Jesus and asking God what he really wants me to understand at this time about walking with him. That quest has taken me, perhaps unsurprisingly, to Hebrews 12, which Lydia has just read the first part of for us. And I'd just like to share a few thoughts with you from that chapter. Hebrews 12 verses 1 and 2 says, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Lydia read that from the Message version, which puts it like this. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished the race we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed. A bit of background then to Hebrews. Hebrews is a letter written to people who were finding their faith journey tough, and they had reason to be fearful and discouraged, as fierce criticism and even persecution was a reality for them. Some of them wanted to give up and go back to their old ways. They were people who had converted to following Jesus from a Jewish religious tradition, and going back to some of them was looking attractive. At least the Jewish rules and regulations were familiar, even if they had willingly left them behind to follow Jesus. The writer of Hebrews, and we don't actually know exactly who that was, therefore writes to these people to encourage them to keep going and persevere in the face of difficulties. The central theme of the book is that Jesus is far superior to everything that they've left behind for his sake. In the previous chapter, chapter 11, he offers the encouragement of the people who've gone before and showed extraordinary faith. Role models, if you like, Old Testament heroes who they would know and admire and whose example might spur them on. And then in chapter 12, the writer uses a sporting analogy to help them see how running a race requires discipline, determination, and focus. Verse 1 said, "Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus." The writer points out later in the chapter a number of things that will hinder our ability to run the race with perseverance. And he encourages us to throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. So this chapter is full of motivational stuff. And I want to just briefly highlight 4 things that the chapter points out that can hinder us, which I hope is helpful, particularly if you're finding your faith journey tough at the moment. So number 1, hindrance. In verse 5, the writer asks the question, "And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son?" Number 1 hazard for the journey is forgetting that we are children of God. We're not simply religious people who happen to believe a certain ideology. We're the privileged family of Jesus. That's our context in good times and bad. Whatever the circumstances, we are God's children. And if we forget that, it will be very hard to keep going. As Christians, we are children of God, always loved, always forgiven, living under grace. The second hazard is failing to see and take action over uneven paths that can trip us up. Verse 12 says, "Therefore strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet." Again, I like the way the Message puts this. So don't sit around on your hands. No more dragging your feet. Clear the path for long distance runners so no one will trip and fall. So no one will step in a hole and sprain an ankle. Help each other out and run for it. As someone who is closely following the instructions given to me by my physiotherapist at the moment and doing regular exercise to strengthen my arm, this verse strikes a chord. The Christian life is a marathon that we do together and not a sprint. Steadily working on the God-given instructions strengthens us and leads to healing and wholeness. But it takes time, consistent effort, and commitment to following God's instructions. The path will be bumpy, but there's instruction here to be watchful and work hard to clear it for ourselves and each other. I don't know what the bumps in the road have been for you, but we are encouraged here to be watchful and to help each other. Number 3, work on your relationships. In my experience, there are many people who've given up their faith journey because of difficult relationships with other people. Now, that can be a very complex and sensitive issue, but the writer here is clear that we all have a responsibility to work at building and maintaining good relationships. Verse 14 says, "Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." For those of us who have a natural determined streak, I think this is really important. It seems that whilst the writer is urging perseverance in our faith, it isn't the dogged determination to get to the end, gritting our teeth against the people who've upset, irritated or hurt us along the way. That bitter version of perseverance is more likely to entangle us, according to this chapter. Our example is Jesus. Fixing our eyes on him, we see joy in the journey, even in the hardest times. Verse 2 told us that Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. And number 4. Finally, in this brief look at what can entangle us, verse 16 recalls the Old Testament character of Esau. Verse 16 says, "Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son." I'm sure there's a lot of deep theology in that verse, but just looking at it very simply, the story of Esau is one in which he's tricked into grasping at a meal that would satisfy his short-term desires, but at the expense of his lifelong destiny. So the warning for us on our faith journey is to avoid temptations that seem to offer happiness in the immediate short term, but deep down we know that they're not God's best for us and will lead to long-term regret. So, 4 things that can get in the way of our perseverance on our faith journey. So I don't know whether coronavirus lockdown has been difficult for you or has strengthened your faith. It's certainly been a different time for all of us. So there's encouragement in this chapter to actively throw off everything that hinders or entangles us in our faith and to keep going. And we've briefly looked at 4 of those hindrances and what they might be. But that's not the best bit. Whilst we have some responsibility to help ourselves to keep going in tough times, that can be very challenging, if not impossible. So in this chapter, the focus is on Jesus. And the encouragement to keep going, the real encouragement, is his example and his destiny. Now, the writer to the Hebrews uses a sporting analogy to help us think about the Christian life. He uses the race, presumably a running race, probably a marathon. But personally, I've always hated running. Climbing mountains, though, is a physical activity that I do know and have enjoyed, and which definitely requires perseverance. I'm one of 3 children. I'm the eldest and I have 2 younger brothers, and both our parents were very keen hill walkers and climbers. That meant that as children we were dragged up most of the mountains in the Lake District and North Wales, as well as a fair few in Scotland. In common with Alan, our vicar, it was my mum and dad's joy to be outdoors in the hills and mountains, and most of our holidays therefore were walking in the hills, whatever the weather. On one memorable day on a family holiday in the Lake District, my dad decided that we were going to climb another mountain. Alan, for your benefit, it was Great Gable, but not the easier route from Honister Pass, but the hard slog from the Blacksail Youth Hostel. It turned out to be one of those days that passed into the family history book, and about which we frequently laugh when we get together. Basically, us 3 children didn't want to go on another mountain walk. We wanted to play in the mountain streams and have a picnic, but Dad saw the good weather and the mountain peak, and true to character was determined to get to the top. So, reluctantly as children, we set off. But halfway up a very steep incline, which was very demanding, the revolt began. The 3 younger members of the family, including me, I think we were aged about 12, 10 and 8 at the time, sat down and refused to go another step. Dad's usual trick of saying, "Oh, just a bit further over the next hill and then we're nearly there," just wasn't working. And as far as we were concerned, it was time to give up and go back. Needless to say, if you knew my parents, giving up was never an option. But they did recognise that on this occasion, we needed encouragement of a bigger and different kind. So they slowed the pace. We had an early lunch, and then the entire journey to the top of the mountain became a storytelling adventure in which each of us chose our favourite story and told it, taking our minds off the upward slog. And of course we reached the top, and there was a glorious view on a very clear day, and that sense of achievement that we'd made it, all the more poignant because of our earlier resistance. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us. We journey with Jesus, who began and has finished the race we're in. He knows the way, and he is the way. So eyes fixed on him is the answer. Like my mountain story, when we're finding our faith journey hard going and we feel like giving up, the writer to the Hebrews says, go over that Jesus story again. As we journey with him, we can tell him when we're finding it hard. But we should also expect and allow him to lead us forward, step by step, sharing, talking, allowing him to turn our attention away from the tough challenge and onto the relationship we share with him that ultimately takes us to our final destination. And it's worth it when we get there. Through it all, my eyes are on you, Jesus. Amen.